So today, okay, we are going step by step, and today we will be in the Gospel of Luke. So, first of all, I'm sure you know it by heart, right?
Huh?
Yeah, right.
About
So, yeah, you know it by heart,
Oh.
right? Yes.
committed to memory.
So,
That's fine, but I can't read that.
Gospel of Luke. One more reminder, one more time. We've talked about this in the last two, in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Mark. The gospel, the word gospel, stands for good news. Okay, so it comes from the Greek word evangelion, and one part is very familiar, angel, so someone who brings the message. So it's a good message, good news. And Luke actually describes himself that he is the only guy who was not really an eyewitness, but to compensate for that eyewitnessing stuff, he does a very careful investigation. If you read verses 1 through 4, that's in the first chapter. That's where he goes to. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the very beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seems good to me also, having followed all the things closely for the same time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. Okay? At least two or actually three things which are important in these four verses. Thing number one, Luke tells us this is not the first gospel ever written. The people already have been doing this. Therefore, we are should not be surprised that we already have Matthew and Mark written by the time Luke undertakes, his task. Another thing is he acknowledges that he talks to many, many people to put everything in order. Okay? And most likely by the word of order, we mean the chronological order. Okay? So his gospel is, most likely, is one of the most chronologically precise. Okay? There are some other things that we do find in the Gospel of Luke, and we do not find them anywhere else. Nowhere else we have anything about the family of John the Baptizer, and we do not really know the connection between the family of John the Baptizer with Mary. Okay? So we have a genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew that goes from Abraham through, Isaac, Jacob, so on and so forth, all the guys, then King David, and then we end up with Joseph. And we have genealogy in chapter 3 in the Gospel of Luke that go kind of backward from Joseph back to Abraham, and actually further. It's very interesting that if you will look into chapter 3, it goes to Adam, and then it goes to God. So the numbers are very important for genealogy in Matthew. It's 42 generations, which is compared to many different things. For example, 42 stations of the Israelites in the wilderness. In Gospel of Luke, we have 77 generations. Okay, and we know that 7 is important number. I mean, we're not going to go into numerology and meaning of the number, but at least we understand that the combination of 77 is important. But sometimes people believe that the genealogy in Luke, somehow, I don't know how they come to this conclusion, but genealogy in the Gospel of Luke is the genealogy of Mary. Okay, her family, her kind of part. No. She's not mentioned in chapter 3, but she's mentioned in chapter 1. And it says that Mary visited her relative Elizabeth. And we know from chapter 1 that Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptizer, was from the priestly family. Okay? Which means what? Which means Mary was also from a priestly family. Okay? Now think about that. We have Jesus who is born from the woman who is priestly by her lineage, by her genealogy, on one hand. Therefore, he has a right to claim the high priest position. On the other hand, he is raised in the family of the guy who is in the kingly lineage. Joseph is from the lineage of King David. So therefore, when he is fulfilling the ministry of high priest and the king, it's not only some kind of, I don't know, typology, analogy, or whatever the thing is. It's really in his blood also. He can claim both of those positions. So that's kind of interesting to understand. So when he writes, he probably wrote the last, or close to the last, so some 60s, definitely before 70 AD. Why do we need to know this before 70 AD? Because in 70 AD something happened that we usually, when I would draw my timeline, we have not been doing this for a while, so let's recollect some things, okay? Usually I would put the cross at the very end. I will move it a little bit further, closer this way, and it's 30 AD, and we would end here. The thing is, we need to understand, okay, 40 and 45 BC. What happened in 40 and 45? Anybody remembers? Exodus, cool. See? Okay, then about 1000 BC. A little bit later actually, but let's stay with 1000 BC just for numerical numbers. So the temple is built.
And then it went down.
Hey, don't jump the gun.
Yeah. But okay, if you know that it went down, do you remember the date by any chance? No. Okay, cool. 586 BC. So roughly, it's about 400 plus and 400 plus here. So it's like, and it's not 400, but with an exile that took like 70 years plus, and we end up with about 400 till Christ. So temple, and we'll save it as we just heard it, down, okay? But the important thing is, yes, we do have an important day which is 30 AD, which is, crucifixion, the end of Jesus' ministry. But in 40 years, okay, 40 reminds you of anything? Yes. The desert, okay? The desert, we have, okay? For 40 years, then temple, okay, again goes down. So that's our first, so it's 70 AD. So that's an initial growth of the church that we find in the book of Acts. And since Luke is a very careful investigator, and we know that the book of Acts is written by Luke also, he writes that this is my second book to you, okay, Theophilus. And he does not mention the destruction of the temple, which is very important for understanding of the church history. Most likely, both of those books were written before the destruction of Jerusalem, okay? Very simple.
Isn't he a doctor also?
Possibly. He's kind of, Paul calls him as a physician, as a friend physician. We do not see how he performs any doctoral responsibilities, which is actually very interesting. Sometimes you begin to believe in chance or in a providence. I was walking in one of the main streets of St. Petersburg and met a friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, actually, I'm going to defending of the PhD thesis. Not his, but his friend." I said, "What would that be about?" He said, "Yeah, it's about the Gospel of Luke." I was like, "Okay, I can just go with you." So I went. We spent the whole day. It was wonderful. The theme of the thesis were that the Luke is actually a lawyer. And the guy, lawyer. Not a liar, but a lawyer, okay? I know it's very easy to mistake, we have a whole movie about that. But seriously speaking, he is a lawyer. It does not mean that he could not be a doctor, but the way so the guy built up his thesis around an idea. The way he describes the courtrooms, the court situation, what things are said, what things are not said, what things Luke in both the Gospel of Luke, in the trial of Jesus, and in all the trials that we have, or all the troubling situations we have with Peter and Paul and John. So when you think of that, the fact that he uses precise language, very characteristic for the first century AD. So he comes to, again, we don't know, but we can ask this when we will reach heaven. But it looks very interesting if he is a lawyer. So just an idea. Now, the structure of the whole book can be presented in a variety of ways. I'm not gonna, I didn't put it in my page because it would take too much space. For example, I will just show you. The friend of mine developed a chiastic structure for the Gospel of Luke, which is this long. If you can see, it goes like this. So that's the cool about chiastic structures. You can see them from far. You can see that these things are parallel, blah, blah, blah. I might want to put it on the pastor's blog. So if you can go to our website, click it, pastor's blog, and give me a couple days, I'll put it there. But you can summarize it as short as this. I should have brought it. We have a 2-volume commentary by Arthur Just. A great guy, great scholar. He wrote extensively on the Gospel of Luke and other parts, but he kind of presents this small structure, and I think it covers the basics. So we have an infancy narrative, and we have a resurrection narrative. So when everything is arranged about Jesus coming into the world, the first 2 chapters. And we have everything that talks about Jesus being raised from the dead, and then his, communication, networking with other people after that. So we have networking of people that leads to the birth, and then we have resurrection and the networking that goes after that. Then we have B and B prime. The B is preparation for Jesus' ministry. That's his baptism. That's the first preaching in the synagogue, and so on and so forth. And then, which matches that is a passion narrative, B prime, from 22 to 23, to 23:56 to be precise. And then we have Galilean ministry, C, and what matches that is Jerusalem ministry. So we have geographical pointers. We have one side, the northern part of Israel, and we have at Jerusalem, the southern part of his ministry. And then in the middle, we have a journey toward. So that's the part where he begins to move from Galilee to Jerusalem. And Luke spends more time than any other gospel writers on the journey idea, which makes Jesus kind of a prophet-like figure. Not the prophet in the sense of the person who predicts the future, but let me turn our whiteboard this way. Under the Old Testament, or not Old Testament as a book, but old rules, old institutions, okay? Under the rule of Torah, okay? Or, Old Testament. We have priests, we have kings, and we have prophets. Okay? Who is the priest? Priest is the person who makes sacrifices, okay? Who kind of compensates or atones for the past and guards people in the sense of knowledge of what's in the scripture. Okay? Priest is guarded by law. Okay? We usually are so scared to read, like, for example, book of Leviticus. okay? Because it's full of things that we have no clue. I recently, Charlie kind of shared with me, I was reading first 6 chapters and it's just weird. Blood everywhere. It's like, yeah, but that's what they lived in, And we think, if you read all of those sacrifices, there are so many things which are strange to us that we kind of lose, desire to go into that stuff. And it looks so complex, we do not understand it, we cannot kind of grasp it, what's going on. Okay, just think about that. The Leviticus as a whole, just one book, Leviticus, is, 27 chapters, something like that. Okay? Theoretically, you can probably read it, I don't know, a couple hours or something like that, if you're really, really slow. It's, 40 pages at best. Now think about the shops where you go to fix your cars. And think about the shelves and the books of, Clinton, the main thingy,
Chilton.
Oh, Chilton, yeah, on the shelf. And here is Ford.
Yeah,
Here is Chevy.
that's right.
Here is, Honda.
Yeah.
Here is Toyota. There is nothing on Nissan because Nissan does not need to be fixed. Sorry. That's supposed to be a joke. Okay? But seriously, you have Nissan. All of that stuff. Surprisingly, I'm pretty sure you would be suspicious if the guy, you come into the shop and the guy's like, oh, you have a Ford. Okay, that's the model. Okay, then let me check the book. Usually don't. They know it. They know it by heart. So why? Because if you have been doing this for life, you kind of know it. Here's the engine. And here's not the engine. I know it's hard with Porsche because you open it up, you open the hood and there is no engine, but that's okay. Or with Tesla, that's okay. Sorry.
Some shops don't work like that, though.
I know.
That's right.
I know, but you get my point,
Yeah.
So if you are born into the priestly family, under the Old Testament, you could not become a priest. Just no way. You either born into the family, you could be adopted into the family, but you could not be adopted at the age, 15. You could be adopted at the very early age. That's what happens with Samuel. Right. Samuel was not from the priestly family, but he was adopted into the family of the high priest. That's why he spends time in the tabernacle and so on and so forth. So if you are born into the family, and what dads are talking about when they come from work to home? About the work. So if your dad is a priest, he's going to talk about priestly stuff.
Maybe.
The sacrifices, this and that, how we clean the tabernacle, the table of, showbread, or the lampstand, all of the incense, what kind of incense to use, this and that, So by 25, when you begin associate ministry, you kind of know it, and plus you hear it every week in the synagogue. Every year there is a cycle to read the 5 books of Moses. Okay, so by 30, you kind of know it. Okay, you might need some guidance, but as the years go by. So my point is, priests are guided by the law. They do everything what's written in the book. If somebody has a leprosy, not in our sense, but in their sense, like a skin disease, priest doesn't need to think what to do. He comes, observes. If that's white, special stuff, you quarantine the person, come back in 7 days, everything is regulated, okay? Kings are guided by wisdom,
Oh.
okay? Why? Because you go beyond the law in a sense, and the main example of that would be in the Solomon, of course, the most wise guy. 2 ladies come to him and say, and both of them claim that the child is theirs. Right. What part of Torah, what part of 5 books of Moses you're going to read about that? Nothing. You need to have a special guidance and understanding of how to solve the problem now. So, priests are mostly dealing with past because they atone for the sins of the past. King is dealing with present.
Okay. If they're like.
Okay? And the priests are guided by the word. So the word which is given to them. They are part of the counsel of God. Okay? Right before we go into, for example, Isaiah 53, Isaiah says, who would believe what we have heard? Heard from whom?
God.
From God. Okay? They are guided by the word that comes from above, and they tell something, not necessarily predict the future, but they formulate to help people to come in to the future. Okay? That's why we have false prophets. One of the main examples of the false prophecy would be Karl Marx. He formulates the words in such a way that gives people direction into the future. It's not godly future, it's anti-God future, but it's still the future. Okay? So when people when a minister directs people into the future, it's a prophetic ministry.
Oh.
Priests are in the tabernacle. They are connected to the tabernacle. Kings mostly deal with their hands, okay, or the swords. Sword is an extension of hand, okay. That's why Solomon picks the sword and say, okay, let's just cut it in half. Okay, you get a half, you get a half. Everybody happy, you know.
Except
It's not what happened. You know the story, but prophets are mostly walk from place to place. Okay, that's why beginning with Elijah, Elisha, and then the ultimate example of the prophet would be Jonah. He travels so far that nobody have ever traveled before. Okay, so all of that I just said to explain why there is such a long travel narrative in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus travels from place to place. Therefore, he is a prophetic and the preaching. He gives the future ideas about the world. What else do we have here? There are a few things, as I said, that we do not have in any other Gospels. As I said, we have something that relates to the family of John the Baptizer, something that relates to the family of Mary. There is also one important thing. If you'll go with me to chapter 9 of Gospel of Luke. Right? Yes. In the Transfiguration story, in Transfiguration we have in Matthew, in Mark, in Luke, but only in the Luke Gospel. Look at verse 31. Okay, let's go with 30. Behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah. Okay, that's interesting to know how they figured it out, but that's not for today's study. Okay, now Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his, in ESV we have spoke of his departure. Okay? Do we have any other translations?
Decease.
Decease, okay. What is that? What translation do you have?
New King James.
New King James, okay. RSV?
It's, I'm blanking on it.
31, 931. They were talking about
Yes, departure.
departure.
Yeah, NIV is departure.
Departure, okay. It's
Departure.
close enough, but not good enough. Okay, in NIV, in 931, they should talk to him about his exodus. That's the word. That's a Greek word. I don't know why they smoothed it. All translations did it. Don't worry about that. So it's not, what is the best translation? The best translation is your own. You take the original text, you deal with that, you suffer through all of that stuff. When you try to translate the wilderness narrative, you feel like the sand is in your mouth, when you translate that thing. But it's Exodus, and it's important. He makes the Exodus out of this world through the cross. That's where the Exodus of Israel finally will end, when he is on the cross. On the other hand, that what begins the Exodus narrative for the church. You know, those 40 years, if we want to go back, the 40 years of the wilderness that we have here between his crucifixion and ascension, and the 40 years till the tabernacle second time is destroyed and goes down. Also, there are important things to understand about like a sacrificial system, and that's why, what was that, about a few months ago I said, there are 3 things it's good if you will spend your time for or with. Genesis 1 through 6, Exodus 25 to 31, that's where description of the tabernacle is. And Leviticus 1 through 6, that's where, or 1 through 7, that's where description of all the sacrifices, because that's crucial for understanding of the rest of the scripture. And here, when, for example, in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 1, when Zechariah, the father of the John the Baptizer, is in the temple, and he does his ministry. Okay, that Zechariah, the father of the John the Baptizer, was not a high priest. He was just a regular priest. He was a normal, godly guy. Everything was fine. But he comes into the inside of the temple, and he stands in front of the altar of incense. And on the right side appears the angel, and he is afraid. And we're like, okay, big deal. Why? No, not important. It is important because he comes on the north side of the altar, and the north side is a judgment side. We know it from the, for example, we know it from the prophet Jeremiah from chapter 1, because that's where the judgment comes, from the north. And also the blood of the animals were poured on the right or the north side of the tabernacle. So when we know those details, even within the gospel, many things become clearer, or not necessarily clearer, like it's not clear that God loves people, but it gets deeper and brighter. Another example is very famous, I'm just thinking where to stay, very famous parable that we have only in the Gospel of Luke. Okay, in 15:11 to 31 is a prodigal son story. Okay, parable of the prodigal son. If we'll jump there for 1 second, again, that's why it is important to know the sacrificial system. I mean, it doesn't mean that you cannot come to communion if you don't know it, but it's good to invest some of your time. If not, then, ask me and I can help as much as I can. I know some stuff, I don't know everything, but it would be good if people would know more about that. Now, the cool thing about that, what is this story about? Great love of the Father, right? I mean, cool. Nothing will change that. But there is a detail that kind of helps us to understand this parable even deeper. When the younger son comes, what animal father offers for the feast? A calf. Okay? So, younger son.
Right.
Okay? Did I spell it right? Yes. Okay. When the older son comes back, he says to the father, when I ever wanted to have a party with my friends, you did not give me
Calf.
goat. Okay? Okay? Goat.
Oh.
Where do we see these two animals together?
Uh-oh.
We see it in Leviticus 16 in the ritual of what is called Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement. And the thing is, it is important that the calf is offered for the priests. So the first priest, not in his glorious robe, comes into the temple with the blood of sacrificed calf, and that establishes a closer relationship between God and his ministers. Then, being atoned for, all the priests can change their clothing and the high priest most importantly. And then he brings the sacrifice of the goat. Now knowing that, what the story is about. The story is about loving Father, for sure. But what we need to understand that the older son never ever he did not want to have a close relationship with the Father. He wanted to stay at some kind of distance as the one for whom the goat is sacrificed. He did not want to be as close as the minister or the priest for whom the calf is sacrificed. Okay? So again, when we know the sacrificial system, and in the Gospel of Luke it's pretty apparent, we can understand, again, it will not drastically change the meaning. It just will make it deeper. Okay? It's more, I don't know, like a brilliant. It just begins to play with more colors.
So is a goat less than a calf, value-wise?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
it's less. Less.
Less than the calf,
Okay.
but more than the lamb.
Right.
Because goat is a leader also. But it's a leader of the, how can I say, secondary class. See, again, we don't think in those categories. But when you read the sacrificial system, everything kind of begins to make sense. Because the calf is the bigger one, and it is sacrificed for priests, leaders in general. Okay, but in Leviticus 16, that's for the calf goes for the priest, and then the goat covers everybody else. So the older son wants to be like everybody else. Okay, staying at the distance. Yours is yours, mine is mine.
No touch.
And it's not close relationship. Unlike the father wants to have with both of his sons, and he shares. All what is mine is yours. All of that stuff.
Maybe he was jealous.
Who? The older son? Probably. Probably. So there are other things you can read in the notes. It was very interesting to see that many biblical canticles in our Lutheran service book, and I even wrote the numbers, 933, 934, 935, 936, 937, and 938 are based on the passages from the Gospel of Luke. Okay? It's either Song of Mary or Zechariah or Elizabeth or Simeon, things like that. So we have quite a number of things in our hymnal which is based on the text of the Gospel of Luke. And then the memory verse I wanted to take from the parable of the prodigal son. So he, father, said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. And it was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive, and he was lost and now is found." Okay, and that also was a trigger for another important hymn that we all know probably even by heart, Amazing Grace. I once was lost, but now I find, was blind, but now I see. So there are some few things, but this idea that he was lost and found and was dead and now alive, that's an important thing. So to conclude, Jesus in the Gospel of Luke walks long ways and trails to find the lost and bring back to life what was dead. He did then, he does it now. He reaches out through the ministers to whom he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and charged to share the promise of his Father, clothing them with the power from on high. Okay, questions or comments? Yes, brother.